call this meeting, this work session rather, of the Anchorage Assembly to order. We'll start with stating our names for the record. Start with you.
Catherine Kemp. Shayna Kilcoyne.
Forrest Dunbar.
John Battleton.
Mitch Peterson. Dave Grant.
Suzanne LeGrand.
Felix Rivera.
Okay, great. So let's start talking. We have a presentation, I understand, from the administration.
Thank you.
Oh, and note for the public. Note for the public, we have some sandwiches in the back. Please help yourself if you'd like some. And yeah, please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much for allowing us this opportunity to present a resolution to support the development of the Climate Action Plan for Anchorage. In front of you, you've got the memorandum and resolution that I'll direct you to, and I think you should all have hard copies of that. My name is Shayna Kilcoyne. I'm the Energy and Sustainability Director for the Municipality of Anchorage at Solid Waste Services. And just for a little bit of background, this is a fairly new position. I've been at Solid Waste Services working on this since May, and the position did not exist before. The city had been doing a lot of work on clean energy, such as changing out our street lights, but now we've made more of an investment, and we're really gaining some momentum here. I want to introduce Catherine Kemp, who's going to be helping me with the presentation. She's a special assistant in the mayor's office, and she's been working on this longer than I have, and I really appreciate her work on this, as well as Mara and Alex, who are here today. I just want to say quick that last week I was fortunate to attend the Global Climate Action Summit in California, and it was truly a wonderful event. Just amazing amount of cities, regions, nations, companies, government and non-governmental organizations all pulling together to do whatever we can, whatever it takes to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it was really exciting and inspiring to be a part of that. And it was also exciting because every time you talk to people about Alaska, people just get really excited and they want to know what's going on here and be a part of it. At the summit, though, the message was clear. While we have all these great efforts and commitments, we are not where we need to be as far as our efforts in changing the rate of climate change. And we really need to step it up by 2020 if we want to avoid the worst of climate change impacts. The good news is it's really clear what those actions are. And so that part is not a mystery. It's really about making a plan and implementing that. There's a lot of local and global action and momentum that Anchorage is going to be able to tap into. So we are ready to go and excited for this.
So if I can interrupt you for a second, note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson, also Ona Browse from the mayor's office. And because we have a little time, could people in the audience perhaps introduce themselves as well? We'll start with the First Lady.
Hi, I'm Mara Thimmel, and I'm very excited that you're entertaining the idea of a climate action plan, because this actually happened about 10 or so years ago initially, and so it's long past the time that the city takes some climate action.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Gene. Go to the left.
I'm Eugene Carl Haveman, I represent myself.
Great.
I'm Daniel Arendt. I'm with Alaska.
Good place to be. Okay. And
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
thank you. Okay, great. So please continue.
So next week at the Assembly meeting, you'll have the opportunity to adopt this resolution, and I just want to be clear, this is for support of the development of the Climate Action Plan, and we're not asking for your support of the Climate Action Plan at this point. And I also just have the intention of opening communication with the Assembly. I want you to be really comfortable asking questions about it. I want you to be comfortable talking to your constituents about it and understanding what their concerns are and being able to respond to them. So if there's anything that you would ask of us in order to keep that communication line open, please do. On a broad level, over the past 60 years, I think you guys all know this, Anchorage or Alaska has been warming twice as fast as the lower 48. Our average temperature has increased 3 degrees, and the winter average temperature has increased 6 degrees. So that's an enormous change in our quality of life. And as an Arctic region, we face some very unique challenges as far as climate change goes, including early snow melt. We've seen rapid reduced sea ice, widespread glacier retreat, melting permafrost, and drier landscapes and more wildflowers. I wish more wildflowers, but more wildfires as well.
Fireweed, maybe.
Yes, I've had a lot of coffee today. And we don't really know yet what the extent of that impact is, but in Anchorage we are already seeing some of that impact, including less snow and more ice. We're seeing unpredictable salmon returns with warming water and ocean acidification, more wildfires. That's going to be a hard one. We were fortunate this year, but we have seen more wildfires. And invasive pests and species, including ticks climbing further and further north, and spruce bark beetle is another big one that we've been dealing with that I'm sure you've noticed in our forests. And so these warming temperatures are changing hydrology, and these are going to lead to a change in quality of life, habitat loss, encroachment by these invasive species, and changing migratory patterns. What the city is going to see as a result of this, and is already seeing, is increased costs and challenges to maintaining and operating critical infrastructure. Street maintenance is a good one, making sure our streets are safe for people to drive on when there is freezing rain and ice. Really quickly, I want to talk about what exactly a climate plan is, and it's pretty simple. We're talking about a comprehensive plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so identifying opportunities and actions that help us do that. In the end, our intention is to develop smart, actionable, measurable goals that we can adhere to in order to get there. And we're not only going to come up with a list of actions that make sense for Anchorage, but we want to take it further than that. So what does it mean to implement that action? Who is the lead department or agency? What is the greenhouse gas impact? How will this be funded? And what are likely community benefits and costs? The good news is we have over 9,000 plans that we can look at in order to help us with this that are committed to a climate action strategy. Cities really are leading the charge, and Anchorage is no different. Mayor Berkowitz joined the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is an international coalition to combat climate change. So we've actually been looking at all of these different plans throughout the lower 48 and Homer, which implemented or created a plan in 2007, and we are taking the opportunity to learn from these different plans. We've got Flagstaff, Cleveland, LA, Portland, and university staff and faculty have spent a lot of time going through these and kind of pulling out the best of what we're seeing from these. And so that's going to help us develop our plan. And I want to also point out that it's not just cities that are leading the way. Businesses really are doing their role. Nearly a fifth of Fortune 500 global companies have identified and committed to emissions reductions targets. And not only that, we've got over 150 large global companies that are committed to 100% renewable energy. And that includes Nike, GM, Apple, Facebook, Lego. There's plenty of them. Businesses are driving the demand. And Mara mentioned that this is not our first effort. In 2009, she was actually a part of a university effort to create draft some actions that can help us reduce our impact on climate change. And from that, actually, just last year, Alaska Center for Energy and Power, the Institute for Social and Economic Research, and the Nature Conservancy took that and kept going with it and created a greenhouse gas inventory draft for the city that we're working from. So one more thing that I wanted to point out that shows that we're not just starting from scratch and we're not just starting at ground zero is that the mayor actually commissioned a study, the Anchorage Energy Landscape and Opportunities Analysis, that was completed last May that really does provide some really great opportunities for the city that's going to go right into this plan. So that was a municipal-wide look at how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to talk for a minute about what we're calling the CAP ecosystem. The scope is really focused on the municipality, but we're not just stopping there. We're going to look at what the municipality can do to foster relationships and partnerships and have an even greater impact. The university did receive a faculty innovation fund of $80,000 in order to develop this climate action plan, and we're really thankful to have their expertise and their time on this. They've been great to work with. There are 7 different working groups. Each of these working groups will create a chapter of the climate action plan, and each of these working groups is led by a university faculty member and has about 6 to 8 members, people with varying expertise and backgrounds who are going to help write this. Those people do include people from the municipality, depending on what department is needed for each of these sectors. Includes other university people. There's different businesses that are involved, and governmental or non-governmental organizations, as well as residents that are a part of each of these. I'm going to go through these really quickly so to kind of give you an understanding of what's in each one. Buildings and energy, this is obviously a big one. We have a lot of energy efficiency recommendations so far in our brainstorming session, which is really exciting to me because my background is efficiency and I love energy efficiency. And in fact, I'm curious if I could get a show of hands of anyone who's taken advantage of the home energy rebate or weatherization programs.
Before I bought my house.
So a couple. These were really great programs targeted towards residential homeowners and renters that helped improve their energy efficiency and lower their energy use costs. And unfortunately, we don't have any money in those programs anymore. There's a little bit in weatherization. But there's still, we've gotten through about 1/5 of our homes, and there's still about 80,000 homes that need to have energy efficiency upgrades made to them. And you know, it's not just about saving energy and saving money, but these are creating healthier buildings. It's improving our productivity and improving the value of the facilities. So energy is a win-win, energy efficiency is a win-win that I'm excited to see a lot of interest in.
I stop you for a second.
Yeah.
And just know for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Croft and Mr. Dyson. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Of course, it's not just energy efficiency. We'll also be talking about renewable energy, some electric vehicles, and heat recovery within the buildings and energy chapter. Consumption and solid waste is really looking at ways that we can diversify or divert some of the waste that's going into the landfill in order to extend the life of the landfill, which is really important since we don't have another space for a landfill. Food systems is about really promoting our agricultural opportunity, promoting local development of food here in the city in order to reduce imported food and increase our reliance, or reduce our reliance on imported food and increase our resiliency. For health and emergency preparedness, we're talking about creating emergency plans for potential climate shocks and integrating climate and health into those existing plans, because climate change impacts are going to be a little bit different than the impacts that we're normally planning for, which is an earthquake. And we do talk about fire hazards as well, so that's going to be just further incorporated. Land use and transportation, this one will include land use planning, walkability, it will include accessibility to public transportation, and then some more, I think we're including a little bit more on planning for electric vehicles in this one. For outreach and education, we're really focused on raising awareness about climate change and educating the community about how residents can take part and make a difference in these efforts and really bring it down to the local level. For urban forests and watersheds chapter, this is about forest management and invasive and pest management. We're helping to promote healthy and resilient forests and watersheds. This is really a collaborative and interdisciplinary process, and we're led by the steering committee, which is 8 members that are from the university and the municipality who are kind of doing all the legwork to keep this together and to keep the process going. And then I want to talk briefly about the advisory committee. This is a really great broad committee. We've got 18 amazing community members. Actually, Mayor Kimmel is the chair of the advisory committee. And the advisory committee is being asked to look at the plan as a whole. You can see it'd be very easy for any of these working groups to get tunnel vision and to really get stuck in their actions and recommendations. And the advisory committee is here to guide them on kind of some of the broader level themes, which include equity, economic development, and public health. So we are really trying to think broadly about the impacts that we're having on the community with each of these actions and recommendations. The advisory committee is also asked to ensure that we are connecting with the right stakeholders and community members as we reach out to the community. One big piece of what we're doing, so far within these working group sectors, we've got about probably 70 people, but that's not the only list of people we need to reach out to during the process. And so the advisory committee and each of the working group members are really helping to make sure that we are consulting with all of the right people and doing as much community engagement as we can. And I also really quickly wanted to point out that the state is also going through a climate action plan process with the climate action leadership team, and we are definitely communicating with them. Actually, Mara is a part of that, and so she's on both of these committees. And we've been working with Danielle Meeker in the governor's office to make sure that if there's any overlap or inconsistencies, we're catching that now. I want to stop here and see if there's any questions, because that was a lot about the structure of the climate action plan. That, you know, I just want to make sure that that's clear. Yes, John?
So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a question then Mr. Welton. So I was looking at the next slide here too about the mitigation versus adaptation. And I was looking at kind of the strategies that you had outlined here and then also what you were talking about here. And the one thing I didn't hear you talk about, and I guess this is sort of a comment as much as it is a question, but the role of density and the environmental benefits of density, particularly in our particular set of circumstances here. And it's something that we at the Assembly and we in the municipality can actually do in effect and have worked on through things like the 2040 land use plan, but also things like the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, for example. Because you can't have walkable cities if you can't live near the things you want to walk to, right? And particularly in Anchorage, where you know, when people can't find appropriate housing in Anchorage, they usually, a lot of them, move out to the valley, and that is like, some of them move up to the Eagle River, but right now the fastest growing part of the state, I believe, is the valley, and that is sort of kind of an apocalypse from the climate perspective, right? It's a huge, long, brutal, in my mind, commute. And so it's just something I didn't hear you mention, but something that very much connects to building energy and land use transportation. It also has the added benefit of something we can actually do and actually change. And the last thing I'll say on that, and stop pontificating, is ironically, some people who consider themselves environmentalists that live in some of our wealthier communities end up being the strongest opponents to density. And so to have this message continue versus people in Eagle River that might not consider themselves, you know, environmentalists, but actually do support density in some cases. This is gross generalizations, but you know, to have this sort of notion in our head that density has environmental benefits, and that if you are aggressively resisting that, you are actually working counter to this. And if that's the way that you guys could promote it, if there's any plans to do that, I'd love to hear about it.
It's certainly one of the things we're talking about within planning, and that's a really tough one to address, but yes, it is on the table.
Yeah, I mean, because your normal constituency who thinks of themselves as good environmentalists are sometimes, not always, opposed to it. And it's worth showing them the evidence that, no, actually, this is important. Sorry, Mr. Weddleton, and then Mr. Dyson, and then anyone else?
Well, I have a quick comment since we're on it, but I have more later. But so there's a comment on like.
That's
I
a
mean,
great.
Just not for all the projects, but just to do the plan.
Oh, to do the plan?
$10,000, 80, 100.
Well, we are trying to track some of what it was one of our goals to track the amount of time that we're spending within the municipality on it. There's no hard dollar amount because all of the money that is going for food and organization is all through that $80,000 grant that went to the university.
There's no additional municipal dollars.
There's no
appropriated
dollars.
for this process. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, staff times money.
Yeah, and we are supposed to be tracking that. I actually need to follow up on that to make sure we're doing
But
that.
you have an 80,000, you have a grant, how much is
The grant to the university is $80,000
and they're paid for these salaries?
of the staff
People?
No. These are people who already work here. So what Shayna is saying is we're trying to get the people who are participating in the 3 technical sessions, and she'll go into that a little bit later, the time allocation and the timeline for the work.
Yep.
But to make sure that they're tracking the hours that they spend on the appropriation, or to see how much it would have cost if we had done a direct allocation to build this.
The university, because they got this grant, they are doing a lot of the legwork.
Right.
Because they've got staff time paid for it.
There's also a lot of volunteer work associated with this, which has value to the municipality as well, in terms of engagement.
Yes, of the 70 people that showed up at the first technical session, many of them were not getting paid directly by the university or the municipality. They come from other entities. Vast majority, I would say.
Yeah.
Mr. Dyson, did you have?
Yeah, mine are appropriate when we get to the next slide.
Okay. Any other questions comments before we get to move on as we continue to move through the presentation? No? Okay. Please.
Okay. So within these actions, we're really separating them into 2 buckets. And for a second, I'm going to get jargony, but this is pretty simple. The buckets are adaptation and mitigation. And this just means for mitigation, we are identifying actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to reduce the rate of climate change. And for adaptation, we're talking about ways that we can plan and protect our places and people in order to protect them from the impacts of climate change. One example is when we talk about forests. An example of adaptation might be that we are working more and more on fire preparedness, and for mitigation we might be planting trees that are more robust to hotter and drier climates. So the Anchorage Climate Action Plan will have both adaptation and mitigation efforts.
And a note about the Venn diagram, you can see that it's not necessarily always strictly mitigation or adaptation. It's just how it helps to categorize them as such sometimes, but some of these actions will count as both. And so just to make that clear as well.
Thanks.
So I'd just like to pitch again, just put the words housing density under mitigation.
Yeah.
Let people know that's what we're trying to do.
And I think your point about like the land use plan addresses that. And so it's a good opportunity to talk about how we want to make sure this aligns with existing plans. And so some of those actions are already out there. And so part of this effort is to kind of collect those and frame them within the context of climate action, because a lot of the stuff we're already talking about fits really well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Was there a
Yes,
question?
Mr. Dyson and then Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, are these, I like this illustration. Is this copied from national things? Or does it should originate with you guys?
Oh, I think we copied this illustration.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think the invasive species and local food production hardly apply to us, and the reduction of methane, and shouldn't be there.
Well, I guess in terms of invasive species, some of the examples that I had given were ticks or spruce bark beetles would be a good one. That
The what?
spruce bark beetles that are killing our trees, huge swaths of trees that we're seeing.
Yeah, they don't meet the definition of invasive species. They've been here for hundreds of years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but why is invasive species here when it comes to reduction of greenhouse gas? And who in the world thinks that Anchorage is going to grow enough food to make a difference on emissions?
Whether we ship it up or produce it here?
Well, but can we, see, I think producing it here is such a marginal impact of producing food, they could quadruple it and it wouldn't make a difference in the total emissions in the area.
I think that actually is a good point in leading up to the next slide where we start to talk about other benefits to the community. So if we quadruple our growth of local food here in Anchorage, maybe it doesn't have that much impact on greenhouse gas emissions, but we'll see an improvement in our resiliency, and we'll see people eating healthier, and we'll see them, outside working in the soil.
Yeah, and absolutely true, and absolutely outside of your stated goal here.
I think there is still a bit of a greenhouse gas impact that we can include as we also increase that resiliency.
I would bet
We-
that making good beer here versus shipping up right here from Seattle has had a measurable impact over the last 15 years.
Yeah, and, but I think that's bad tactics.
I think we do have to have measurements on this, and if that's the case, that it does not increase or have an impact on our greenhouse gas emissions, maybe it does not get included.
Well, but you also responded to my question with talking about quality of life, which I support. But you're going under the wrong label here when you talk about greenhouse gas emissions.
I think that the purpose of the climate action plan and the work that is being done and right now is to determine whether or not those things are significant in the goals of the climate action plan. So while it may not reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we have to find out how much would it, and how would that impact either the CO2 output or the quality of life. And it's under both greenhouse gas emissions and adaptation. So while it may not reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is a movement that we can take to adapt to a changing climate.
Yeah, so respectfully, the energy consumption, private vehicles and heating and generating power so overwhelms everything. It's orders of magnitude,
Yes.
like 1,000 to 1 or more. And it, by inspection, wasting your time on that is you're off task. And I'm all for starting more consciousness about us being more responsible. But taking this money in this project to do that public,
Good. You can say it, good.
no, it is good, but it's off task, and I think dilutes your possibility of selling this.
Fred and I will sometimes oppose good ideas if they're not labeled properly.
Understood.
Well,
And one of the things we're doing is ranking this based on the impact that it would have. So food might not rise very high just for that reason, and therefore we're focused on heat and transportation and electricity.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Peterson, but first, I would love for you guys to just try to figure out what the climate impact would be of putting a toll booth at Eklutna for all the people coming in from the valley. Mr. Peterson?
I'm not going to touch that anymore. I was just going to say we had a presentation at the AMATS committee meeting yesterday, and we used some long-range transportation planning, and they were talking about a 5% increase in public transit and how that would affect long-range needs for roads and moving our population about. So some of the long-range plans are actually already being thought about. Just wanted to insert that. I know we got to keep moving.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Yeah, please continue.
Excellent. So these are some photos of our first technical session that we held last Tuesday that had, like we said, over 70 people from the municipality, the university, come and participate. And we are working to develop our overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions target as kind of the umbrella goal. But I will say at this point, we don't have a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and that is a problem because all of these impacts, we need to measure and verify what we're doing. Otherwise, how do we know if it's making any sense for us? So this is definitely a big challenge that we're working on and trying to figure out how we get that greenhouse gas inventory for the city. We are developing a vision for 2040, so thinking a bit further out, but then our objectives will be focused on 2025. So each of our actions will have near-term, mid-term, and long-term range timeline, thank you, as we develop these. And in this first technical session, which Mayor Berkowitz opened and was very inspiring, we actually were able to start brainstorming what are the greenhouse gas emissions in your sector, and what are some of the actions that we could take to start to impact that. Was there anything else you wanted to add about the session last Tuesday? Okay.
They're working in between those two. I guess we'll get to the timeline a little bit.
So to your point, we do expect that many of the actions in this document will have impacts far beyond greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and that any suggested policies or initiatives will improve health, economic growth, quality of life, among other benefits. So these initiatives can attract new investment dollars to our community and create local jobs, and the idea is to also reduce cost of living. So the actions that are encompassed within the Climate Action Plan support co-benefits of social, economic, and environmental and health benefits. So one example really quick is that by promoting alternative forms of transportation, we are improving health and air quality, and we're improving quality of life by giving people this another opportunity. In addition, we are improving our environment, and we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So we really are trying to be deliberate about what these actions mean for the whole community, and not just have a tunnel vision on greenhouse gas emissions, because cities are finding that there are a lot of other benefits to implementing these types of plans. One thing that we are asking the advisory committee to do is, I think I said earlier, help us identify these as we work on our goals. What are we missing in terms of equity, and what can we focus on more? And so we're really trying to identify the potential for supporting jobs and prosperity, advancing equity, improving local environmental quality, and improving public health as we go through this.
Go ahead.
Shana, you talked about how there are over 9,000 cities that have climate action plans. When did they start doing that? Like, how far behind are we in Alaska?
That's a great question. You saw that Homer's was in 2007,
Okay.
but far beyond that, actually. I don't know that I've seen many yet before 2000.
I think Portland's was in the 90s, but I think they were one of the first ones to pass it. But
So there's actually a
Between
lot
the
to
90s, a
learn
lot.
from other cities. Would you say that those other cities are already seeing some of the benefits? I mean, I know you're not an expert on any of the other cities, but are there things we can pull that have been successful in the other cities into our plan?
Absolutely. That's why we spent so much time looking at these other
Yeah.
plans. We are hoping to just kind of leapfrog. We don't have to do all of this research. We can start from where they've started. And that's why we are so focused on the co-benefits, actually, because they are finding that when you talk to people about these kind of, if you're just talking about the environment and you're just really focused on greenhouse gas emissions, you're missing all of these other benefits to the community that are happening alongside this.
And other cities have definitely used these plans to leverage like funding opportunities, because if you can reach into kind of grants related to health, even though kind of going back to those co-benefits, there was Bloomberg Philanthropies just put out, or they had a climate challenge, and really you kind of needed a climate action plan for that in order to kind of access those dollars to have those targets and things like that. So it also, that's another benefit that cities have seen, leveraging more funding.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson, you're in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that your study does some cost-benefit things. Lots of things that you can do, or will talk about doing, increase the expense of retrofitting buildings, houses might cost $18,000, and so on. But I worry worry about the growth of our visitor industry, which is one of the growing things we have, making it hard for businesses to come here because of meeting our standards on emissions. You know, and with natural gas, emissions are orders of magnitude cheaper than other energy sources. And industry, we need base jobs here. We need to diversify and so on, and population growth. And I'm the only voice you'll ever hear is say we need to evaluate the loss of liberty and personal freedom with everything we do. There are subdivisions in my area where you can't drive your truck home if it's got a logo on the door. You can't, there's a whole bunch of things you can't do because they want it to be nice, you know, and you will quickly run into people who are hunters and fishermen and explorers. They've got a pretty big vehicle, you know, to pull their trailers and everything, and they're major polluters. And you'll end up wanting to regulate out two-cycle outboards, motorcycles, snow machines, and ATVs and so on. Those are part of the quality of life that bring a whole bunch of people here, and they pretty quickly become a target for you. And understandably, they are major polluters, but there's a downside in forcing those people to either spend a lot of money and stuff in order to meet our standards. And I would encourage you to do that kind of downside analysis. What are we going to do to population expansion, the economy, and personal freedom and liberty that's so important to people here?
Well,
Go ahead, you go.
I would hope that, you know, we can have that discussion because these are, you know, hunters and fishermen, and hopefully we can meet on the same grounds that our goal is that you can continue to hunt and fish, you know, forever in Alaska. These are the freedoms that we enjoy in Alaska. And you're right, I've kind of only talked about benefits, and so I am kind of getting into a little bit more of, I haven't talked about costs very much. And so that's definitely something that we are also discussing. I forgot what other point I was going to make. Ona, do you have something?
Well, I was going to say, I think that the immediate focus of the plan is to determine what the municipality as a government can do within its departments and its operations to work towards these goals. It's not necessarily focused on making sure that the hunters with the outboards can't own those anymore.
Yeah,
So,
and from my perspective, sadly, because one of the responsibilities of government is to protect liberty and freedom, you know, and that gets to be a higher priority, you know, in the sense, or a high priority in the sense of what government is supposed to be doing.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue into our focus on equity, because we really are focused on making sure that any benefits and costs do not have that are not all focused on one population. So we certainly want to take into account every different, you know, community and neighborhood that these policies or action items would affect. And so we're working to create these in concert with our residents and make sure that we get their input. We really want to engage them in the entire decision-making process, which Catherine is going to talk about. And so our outreach about, for instance, climate hazards or new programs, we need to make sure that those are made that we make accommodations for limited English proficient individuals, but also, you know, making sure that any cost burden is not put unfairly on any one of our populations. Not just cost, but any negative impacts that might happen, such as that example. And we're, again, asking the advisory committee to make sure that we are doing this sufficiently. Did you have something about that? Okay. So Catherine's going to talk now, I'll hand it over, about our timeline.
Yeah, so this timeline, as we had talked about, there has been work going on this plan since 2009, really. This is kind of the latest iteration of a climate action plan for Anchorage, but we'll just focus on what's gone on so far this year and then what will the next couple months look like. So the steering committee with UAA representatives and Muni representatives was formed in the spring, and we've been creating the process for developing the plan, recruiting the working group members, advisory committee members. We held a work day back in May. That was part of another University of Alaska grant that we received. And that was kind of to define the sectors that we would have in the plan, get people on board initially, and figure out who we should have on these working groups. So the summer was kind of spent developing this process some more, and then fall is really when we are digging into this work. And the goal, as you can see, is to present this for your consideration in early 2019. And then digging further into that, we had our first technical session last week. We'll have another 2 technical sessions with our working groups on October 10th and November 9th. And then the working groups have kind of assignments in between, so they'll be working as groups in between those sessions. There's going to be a community think tank at university or at UAA. That's another part of our grant. That's one opportunity for a community discussion, but I'll get into the other opportunities that we'll have in a little bit. And then December and January is going to be review of those draft recommendations by the steering committee, the advisory committee, mayor's office. Kind of when you have 7 different working groups working on a plan, they do have a template and they have very clear expectations for what we want in the plan, but there's going to be a lot of work to make that cohesive and ensure there's not overlap between the groups. And then after that, we will kind of release the draft plan for public comment to get some online feedback, and then we'll offer in-person workshops as well to get feedback on that draft plan. And then, as I said, present it for your consideration early 2019. Questions about the timeline?
Yes.
So you said present it to the assembly for a vote. Do you know what form that will take? Is it just approval of a plan? Does that involve code changes? Like what? Or are you trying to figure that out? And that's what the next few months is for.
Right. It'll be approval of a plan. It won't have like code changes in that language. It might be a recommendation to look at that kind of thing, but we're not trying to pass like a package of.
So it'll be a resolution?
That's what we had talked about.
Yeah.
Solution for support of the climate action plan.
Yeah, I think Mr. Davidson makes a good point. We don't pass plans,
Right,
We
yeah.
pass resolutions, memos, ordinances, and the structure, what it'll look like is an interesting question. Resolution probably is most appropriate if there's no direct code changes.
That's what we do in non.
I guess that's a good point, yeah. Well, you mean like master plans? Like
They can, but something,
That
a
resolution.
plan like this could be part of our broad, it's like a land use plan, it's
Yeah.
just direction we'll go.
Yeah. Okay. Is that
Yes, so, and then I wanted to just give a brief overview of our plan for community engagement throughout this whole process. And so, like we said, we want to make sure that this plan really reflects the needs and concerns and priorities of Anchorage residents. And so, to do that, we'll have a couple of pretty more traditional open houses where people can learn about the plan, can provide feedback, can provide initial ideas for while we're still developing the plan, and then in December, January, provide feedback directly on the recommendations laid out in the draft plan. And so we really want to be really intentional about kind of meeting people where they're at with this engagement process, because we know not everyone can come to an open house in the evening or can take time out of their day. And so we want to provide a couple of different opportunities, different levels of involvement. So whether that's an online survey, and we'll be posting all this on a website and social media, and we'll have a newsletter to make sure that we're getting the word out. And we're kind of calling these mobile climate workshops where people can, community councils or other community groups can request a presentation about the plan, or can request a more facilitated workshop if they have very specific input they would like to give. So we really want to give people as many opportunities as we can to provide ideas and input on the plan. Questions there?
Broad
Mr. Weddleton has a
Mr.
question.
Wells?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's one more slide. This is the last slide, just like a question slide.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Inspirational.
It's a very pretty picture.
Oh, okay. Hey, it's, yeah, okay. Is that you, Mr. Rivera? Mr. Welton and Mr. Rivera.
Well, this is somewhat interesting. I believe we are at war in this city. We're at war against homelessness, drug addiction, alcoholism. That's our main battle right now. And more and more, that's what I want to fix. And if your staff time on this, we're redirecting to figure out how we can cheaply and efficiently store people's stuff when we clean up the camp on our park. I would feel much better about the time spent. But that's not where we are right now. So as Shana knows, I have spent money insulating my work. I switched, she doesn't know, but I switched on LED. I have solar panels on my door. And it has nothing to do with greenhouse gases. Quite frankly, I don't care. It saves me money. Okay, that's why I did it. And if it helps the planet, I'm totally good with that. Trust me. Okay? It's simply not why I did it. So, some of the phrasing in here, in this room, certainly works and it's inspiring and we feel good. Decrease greenhouse gas emissions. It's awesome, right? For a lot of people, they don't care. In fact, that raises temperatures. Like if you just call it pollution, some of us are more used to that phrase and we got used to that pollution's bad. Greenhouse gas emissions are these mystical kinds of things. And I think that's just pollution, really. But if you delete it, everything in here that says reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce carbon emissions, reduce the municipality's greenhouse gas emissions, and just say saving money, air quality, less pollution, health. So your co-benefits should be the main benefits. That's what we should focus on. They're real, they're measurable, they have meaning to everybody, everywhere. But greenhouse gas emissions, or whatever, you drove your Subaru here, I'm sorry. You blew an awful lot of
She
stuff.
probably bites.
I actually drove my Subaru here.
So this is more efficient because of plastics. So which are bad, okay. But to me, this is. I mean, it feels good. Pop plays good at conferences on stuff like this. But really, if we just focus on, we want to save money in this county. We want to save money by switching to LEDs, get solar panels out. Density is maybe decreases greenhouse gases, but we spend so much money. Most of our dollar investment in this town is on roads. It's scary. And we destroy neighborhoods with those roads. We do so many negative things. Maybe greenhouse gases, I don't know or care. We do those things. If we get higher density, can change some behaviors for even 5% of the population, take a bus, ride a bike, we lower our costs as a city and we have better quality of life. Okay, so that inspires me. This greenhouse gas emission stuff, you just put fuel on the flames. You're going to have people opposing this. There's a bunch of dang greenies. You drove your Subaru to these communities to talk about this. And you flew down to a conference and all the benefits of you growing food in your backyard are gone on that ticket. You know, so with these things, it might feel good symbolically, but just be real. Let's save some money. If you just said, we're going to save money by doing these things, you won't have opposition from anyone. And I would recommend going forward, that's what you focus on. You'll get the same plays, but it's more real.
We have a bunch of people in the queue. I don't know if you want to respond to that or wait to hear from.
I would just like to say I completely agree with you, Mr. Middleton, and I would like to say that I think there's room for both sides of this. There's the room who doesn't give a damn and wants to save money, and there's the room who does give a damn but also wants to save money. And that's the room that the mayor sits in most of the time. So the report that Shana referred to earlier, the Energy Opportunities and Landscape Report, actually identified a lot of the projects that could be done within the municipal government that would save us money over time. That's why we have Shana to implement those projects, but also to take this sort of larger step to make a roadmap, a plan for the rest of the municipality to move towards, to identify what those specific things are. It's not just LEDs, but it is building retrofits and making sure that we're controlling the costs associated with running those buildings. And everything that has come across to us so far has that cost-benefit analysis in it to make the determination as to whether or not that is something that is valuable for us to move forward on. So it's the cost-benefit ratio, it's what do we get out of it as stewards of the municipality's finances, but also as the leadership that has been elected to make sure that the quality of life in this city stays good and gets better. So it's both sides. I hear you.
I actually want to just thank you for that comment.
Can I disagree?
You can, but only after Mr. Rivera and Mr. Peterson get the chance. Yeah, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, I just want to say my name is Felix Rivera. I'm one of those millennial types, and I would squarely put myself in the category that gives a damn, very much of a damn about this subject, and wants to save money as well. I believe we have a moral imperative to work on the issues facing this planet that, frankly, there might be some disagreement on this, but that we have done to this planet, and I think we need to start. And this is a great place for us as a city to start doing that. I have a few questions, though. So 2009 plan, what happened to that plan? I suspect I know. Did it just sit on a shelf?
The plan, I believe, was forwarded to the Assembly and was not adopted.
Okay.
Where's the historian?
Where's Mr.
You're
Training
done.
go?
He always tells us history.
Why wasn't it adopted? Somebody.
You have to go teach.
Did he really?
So what's the time frame for this plan? Was this like a 5-year plan? Is this...
Our vision is 2040. Our objectives, so when we get down to the meat, is to 2025. And so the idea is that we will have a plan for the next plan. We do need to revisit this regularly, and we're kind of seeing what other plans other cities are doing in order to make this work for them consistently.
Okay. 2 more quick questions, Mr. Chair. So first is the list of working groups. Did you get that list from looking at all the other plans? Is it pretty atypical, that list?
Pretty typical.
It's pretty typical.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Correct.
Thank you. And then lastly is there any consideration about the impacts of migration, specifically climate migration, taken into this plan? Because I think as the years progress, we're going to see more of that, which is why this is so important.
Well, we actually have talked about it. We don't have data at this point to show that that's happening right now, to our knowledge. And if you have thoughts on how we project that, because right at this point it's kind of anecdotal, and we suspect that that is happening and will continue to happen, but I'm just not sure how we measure it.
Migration of the geese.
No, I mean, like for example, where I grew up in rural Alaska, the salmon stopped showing up. So people couldn't feed their dog teams, so some of them like literally left. And that's a tiny example, it's a tiny village. But if we get that over this, a region of Alaska, we could end up with a lot of folks here in Anchorage.
We've currently got 3 communities in the state that are considering relocation. More than that. That are like
Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up on what Felix said a little bit, anecdotally, I had numerous employees over the years from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, people who moved here, and this was 25 or so years ago, because it's just too damn hot. And if you've been down there in the summertime, you would agree with them. You just basically melt when it's 90 degrees and 95% humidity. You just can't do anything. But I think the opportunity to promote this to the citizenry is through the dual of, yes, it's going to reduce pollution, but you can also save a decent amount of money. And so those 2 talking points are, I think, ones we need to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, just on the idea that we should, move or hide or delete the climate action and greenhouse gas idea, because some people will be upset by it, and we could sell it just on its own efficiency or cost savings. The farther away pollution gets, the more easy it is to ignore, right? If a sewage problem in my house is impossible to ignore, or lack of clean water in the community, or trash piling up because our landfill is over, it's too full, it's done, it's useful. the more diffuse, the more remote, the more easy it is to ignore what you're doing to other people and to yourself. And we can do the LED and the efficiency things, do them for dual reasons. But it's important to keep this reason on the table because it's something that we have done that we need to fix, but its direct impact is really hard to feel. It's worldwide, and we should decide whether we believe that's true or not. And if it is true, it has all the problems of pollution. It just is a harder causation chain to realize. It needs to be explicitly stated as a value so that you put it in with the mix of all these other things. We know we want to save money and be efficient, and we also know this. Or we don't know this, but we should have that debate and add it as a value that exists with the others, a value of importance. And so no, deleting it is the wrong step.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Arnold.
Just not to debate that. I mean, I do care about pollution. And for people who aren't familiar with acid rain, burning rivers, and killer smog, you're welcome.
So, much of it.
Really a win-win.
Mr. Dyson?
Thank you. What we're going to have before us is just authorizing the city employees to work. That's all we're doing.
It's supporting the city employees to do this work. It
It's
doesn't.
authorizing, or at least pretending we're part of the decision process.
Well, no, I think it's a meaningful distinction. We are encouraging them with a resolution, but by approving their budget, we already sort of authorize them, right? I mean, we could go into their budget and act something out, but we generally do it by department, right? So
There's no specific budgetary line to this effort. This is just part of the process that we will be doing, that they will be doing every day.
Part of our workforce.
Yep.
From things we want them to be doing, to do this. But we got no control over what the goals, product is, and so on and so forth, or the components of it, right? That gets decided by the task force and the university people.
And it will come back to the body, and Shayna has mentioned keeping communication open between the assembly. I think if the assembly is interested, we would be happy to have it referred to a committee where the work can be explained and updated every month.
Yeah, you're going to do your community outreach, including us, but we're out of control of what the goals are, how it's done, and what it produces. And that's fine. And maybe we ought not to because we're biased or opinionated. But but the other question is, what happens? You know, what's going to happen is it's going to be sit on a shelf, and there's no teeth to get it implemented, and as John points out, no money to do it, and so on and so forth. Can't argue that it's bad information, but at the end of the day, it's going to be energy costs and so on. We already know how to insulate buildings, and people can build to it. We've got some pretty good standards. It's going to try to get people to all live in high rises, with little shops on the bottom floor, everybody in an apartment house, and a garden on the top, and no bicycles downtown. That's kind of the utopia for solving the urban situation, and we aren't going there, you know, and so on. And it won't solve even begin to the emissions from the transportation sector. So, anyways, we'll all support this. We all will go do it. Some of us will read it, and nothing will happen, sadly, because things do need to happen.
Well, we will have a chance to, so we'll have a chance to vote on this. I believe it's on this coming Tuesday. And then once it's completed, if it goes according to schedule, then sometime this spring probably, we will have another opportunity to have exactly this discussion and decide whether or not to adopt the plan.
And we will.
Probably.
And nothing will happen.
Hopefully, on that last point, you are mistaken.
I'd be delighted to be wrong.
I would like to say, Mr. Dyson, I will make it my personal effort to prove you wrong.
You
Okay.
may live long.
Thank you all
All
for
right,
your
with that,
time.
this work session is closed.